Is it really worth it to buy an electric car yet, or should you just buy a hybrid or gas car instead? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to Car Club Corner, where we help you, the consumer, master the process of car buying and car ownership. It's no secret that electric cars are rapidly becoming a lot more popular every single year. Most of them have extremely long waiting periods thanks to very high demand and limited availability. And at the same time, more and more consumers are getting concerned whether it even makes sense to buy a gas car for their next vehicle purchase, given the fact that the technology might be obsolete within the next decade or two. So the question then becomes, does it make more sense to buy an electric car? What are the pros and cons of electric car ownership? And in some cases, does it make sense to still buy a hybrid or a gas car instead? Well, make sure to stick around until the end of the video because that's what we're going to find out. And if you enjoy and get value out of this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I post 2 videos a week, always straight to the point, valuable car buying advice designed to help you, the consumer. So let's start off with the many benefits or pros of electric car ownership, starting off with the most obvious one, which is never having to spend any money on gas. With gas prices climbing every year and how much it costs to fuel a gas car, it's no secret that never having to spend any money on gas is one of the main driving factors behind buying an EV. And it is true that the cost of charging an electric car versus spending money on gas can save you a lot of money in the long run. Now ultimately, the savings are going to depend on many different variables: the type of car that you buy, the cost of gas versus the cost of electricity in your area, whether you charge during the day at home or whether you charge at night during off-peak hours. There have been many studies done on this subject, and the consensus seems to be that for the average car owner, you will spend roughly $20,000 over a 10-year period on gas, which is around $2,000 a year. And by comparison, for the average owner, an electric car will cost roughly $5,000 over a 10-year period, which is roughly $500 a year. Now, of course, this is going to vary depending on all the different parameters involved, but this does give you a rough idea of what the average cost is going to be like, comparing the 2 different options back to back. This means that for the average person, an electric car can save you in the neighborhood of $15,000 over a 10-year period, which is a substantial amount of money to save. And not only can you save quite a bit of money on gas with an electric car, but you could also save a lot of money on the maintenance as well. Because of their incredible mechanical simplicity, you're never going to have to spend any money on things like oil changes, other fluid changes, spark plugs, belts, and other maintenance items that can be found on a gas car. Now make no mistake, electric cars are not maintenance free. You are still going to have to spend some money on maintenance for things like tires and brakes and a few other things of that nature too, but it is still going to cost you a lot less over the lifespan versus a gas car. Some repairs are going to be eliminated with a gas car. You're never going to have to worry about oil leaks or gasket leaks, for example, but some of these things are going to be replaced with brand new repairs on an electric car. And some of the repairs are no different. Like for example, if you have problems with the electronics, the touchscreens, the sensors, things of this nature are pretty much the same on both a gas car and an electric car. The average owner will spend roughly $21,000 over a 10-year period on maintenance and repairs for a gas car, versus around $13,000 for an electric car, which is a meaningful amount. And the savings with electric cars don't end with the running costs and operating costs. You can also save some money on the purchase price too, which brings us to the next benefit, the existence of government rebates and incentives. Depending on where you're located and the car that you're buying, you could save yourself thousands of dollars on the purchase price with the use of government rebates. This can be up to $7,500 in federal tax rebates in the US, or in Canada a $5,000 federal rebate, plus provincial rebates in BC and Quebec. Take this Chevy Bolt EUV that I'm driving as an example, which has a starting price of around $28,000 US, or roughly 42,000 Canadian before the rebates. But after you factor in those rebates, the price could drop to as low as $30,000, or where I'm located, $36,000, which makes it roughly the same price as a lot of comparable small SUVs. Now this Bolt is a little bit of an exception due to the below average pricing, but more on pricing a little bit later in the video. For now, let's continue with the benefits of EV ownership. Next up is the driving experience. Electric cars are just so much quieter, a lot smoother, and they produce a lot more power versus a comparable gas car. And because they make their power right away, all that power is available immediately right off the line, which makes a significant difference when it comes to passing maneuvers and merging on the highway. And not only do you get an excellent driving experience with an EV, but there's also some environmental benefits, which is appealing to a lot of buyers too. Of course, one of the main reasons why electric cars are being pushed is the fact that they do help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the lifetime of the vehicle when compared to a gas car. If you look at the net carbon emissions of an electric car versus a gas car over a 10-year period, it is significantly lower with the EV, especially if you live in an area where your electricity comes from renewable sources of energy. Now, of course, there are two sides to the story of EV ownership, especially when it comes to the environmental impact, which brings us to some of the downsides. Putting aside the environmental impact of EVs for just a moment, we'll come back to that one. We have to first address the most significant downside of EVs, which is the purchase price. It's no secret that the vast majority of electric cars are incredibly expensive to buy. The average price for an EV in North America is in fact around $66,000, which basically makes them unattainable for the average consumer. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to this, like this brand new Chevy Bolt that I'm driving right now, but this really is the exception and not the norm. Most EVs are incredibly expensive to buy, and they're just not a realistic option for most buyers. But the cost of EVs is of course not the only barrier. You also have another major issue, which is the driving range. Now, fortunately, this is an area where EVs have made huge improvements over the past decade. When a lot of EVs first hit the market, they were only able to travel around 100 miles or 160 kilometers at best, which made them pretty useless. But fortunately, the majority of brand new EVs on the market are able to travel at least 250 miles or 400 kilometers on one charge, and some are able to do much more than that. And having that kind of range makes them a lot more viable for daily use, especially for those who only intend to use this as their only car. But even so, the range can be an issue for many buyers, especially for those who intend to do a lot of long distance driving, or for those who live in an area where public charging is a problem, or they're not able to charge at home or at work. And if charging is an issue for you, then there's no question that you might experience a bit of range anxiety with an electric car, worried that you might get stranded somewhere without the ability to charge it. And remember, unless you have regular access to DC fast charging, charging an electric car can take a very long time, often at least 8 to 10 hours on regular level 2 power. But even if you are able to charge on a regular basis, you might still experience range anxiety, especially if you live somewhere really cold with extremely cold winters. It's no secret that electric cars lose a lot of their range in the winter time, often at least 20 to 30%, depending on how cold it is outside. Long-distance highway driving can have a serious impact on the driving range as well, because electric cars are far better suited for stop-and-go conditions, like driving around the city. And then, of course, that brings us to the issue of public chargers. Now, of course, this is not going to be a big issue if you're able to charge your electric car at home on a regular basis. But if you do happen to rely on using public chargers, you might run into a few issues. The reality is that the public charging infrastructure is just not very well developed in a lot of cities. And even in cities where it is well developed and you find a lot of DC fast chargers, they're not always the most reliable. There's clearly a lot of work that still needs to be done when it comes to developing the EV infrastructure, and that is going to take quite a few years. And in the meantime, until that infrastructure is developed, there are some other concerns with EV ownership, like the cost of repairs, especially when it comes to the major one, which of course is the battery pack. Now, admittedly, this is extremely rare, and most electric cars do come with an 8 to 10 year warranty on the battery pack to protect yourself. What's actually far more likely to occur than actual battery failure is battery degradation, which means that the battery pack will slowly degrade over time, usually around 5 to 10% over a 10-year period, ultimately depending on how you charge it. It is a normal part of EV ownership, but the one that is far more scary is experiencing actual battery failure. And if that were to happen on an EV outside warranty, you could easily be looking at a 5-figure repair bill. Which brings us to the next major concern with EVs, which is the environmental impact. Now, as mentioned earlier in the video, the net carbon footprint of an EV is significantly lower than a comparable gas car over a 10-year period, especially for those who live in an area where your electricity comes from renewable sources of energy. But if you happen to live somewhere where your electricity is coming from fossil fuels, which is the case for over 60% of Americans, then the environmental impact of an EV is not going to be as good. And then there are the environmental concerns with the manufacturing of electric vehicles themselves, especially when it comes to the battery packs. The reality is that most electric cars do have battery packs that require a lot of precious metals, including lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all of which are mined, which has its own environmental impact. And when you combine the environmental impact of mining these precious metals, manufacturing the batteries, and manufacturing the electric car itself, you often start with a major carbon deficit. But then of course, after a few years of driving an electric car with no gas, and if your electricity is coming from renewable sources of energy, the net result will be a much better environmental footprint. We're still in the very early stages of EV technology, and as the technology improves, so will its impact on the environment. But until that time comes, you do have to determine whether an EV really makes sense for your needs. Now ultimately, I believe that if you're someone where range and charging is not an issue for you, you have regular access to charging, you don't do a lot of long distance driving, and you're able to charge a lot at home, then an EV might work for your needs. And as long as you're okay with the higher purchase price and live somewhere where your electricity is coming from renewable energy, then an electric vehicle could make a lot of sense for you. Ultimately, over a 10-year period, when you consider the capital cost, the maintenance and repair costs, and the cost of electricity, an electric car will cost significantly less than a comparable gas car to own. But then again, there are plenty of consumers out there where an electric car is just realistically not going to work for their needs. This includes those who do a lot of long distance driving, don't have regular access to charging, or perhaps live where there's very harsh weather. And of course, it also includes those who have a limited budget because, as I mentioned, EVs are very expensive to buy. And even for those who can afford one, it might not make the most sense if your electricity is coming from a place that uses fossil fuels. So if any of those parameters fit your description, then an electric car might not be for you. You would be better off buying a traditional gas car, or better yet, a regular hybrid car instead. Hybrid cars are a lot more affordable to buy than EVs, with a purchase price similar to that of a regular gas car, with a fraction of the running cost thanks to being much more fuel efficient. They don't need to be charged, so you don't have to worry about any of the charging compromises or range issues, and because they don't need to be charged, you don't need to be worried if your electricity is coming from fossil fuels. A lot of consumers already understand these benefits, which is why hybrids are so incredibly popular in the market right now. One thing's for sure though, waiting a few years or even a bit longer to buy your next EV can only benefit you, because as time goes on, the technology is only going to get a lot better. So let me know what you thought of this video. Would you consider buying an electric car, or would you buy something else like a hybrid car or a gas car instead? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also check out some of my other car videos by clicking these links over here. Make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and if you need any additional car buying advice, recommendations, or help with getting a great deal on your next new car purchase, make sure to check out carhelpcan.com. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.